technology. There's this quote from Seth Godin that I love. Marketing is no longer about the stuff you make, but about the stories you tell. And today's guest, well, he's just not telling better stories. He's turning anonymous website visitors into meaningful conversations and real revenue. I'm your host, Ken Umansky, and we're diving into a platform that's quietly disrupting digital marketing, but not by shouting louder or spending more. It's not about bigger budgets or more pixels. It's about sharper signals, smarter targeting, and making every click count. With me today is Clay Sharman, founder of Krateo.ai, a company that's flipping the script on digital engagement. Clay and his team are using AI and first-party data to help brands actually understand who's behind the traffic and how to engage them with empathy, timing, and relevance. Clay's no stranger to high-stakes problem solving. He's a former business development leader who helped secure over $2 billion in contracts across defense, healthcare, and national security. Now he's bringing that same systems mindset to marketing. And let's just say the results are anything but ordinary. Internally, he's known as the head creative dude, but his real superpower, helping teams see around corners, using data, using AI, and using real human insight. Clay, welcome to technology. I'm really pumped to have you on the podcast. Your work can change the value of a click. So
Thanks so much.
let's start right at the heart of the issue. Most marketers treat anonymous traffic like background noise. What's the real cost of all that invisibility, and how does Krateo AI change that equation?
Sure. Yeah, great to be here, Ken. I'm going to dive straight into that. First off, these are people who have gone to your website voluntarily and taken no action. So you paid for them, which means from an investment standpoint, that's lost marketing opportunity and investment at the same exact time. Every time somebody comes in and then leaves. So you have that cost. Um, you have the cost of not knowing your SEO may be working, but you have the cost of not knowing the who behind these visitors. And so it gives you no insights into, as you pointed out, the type of messaging that you might use to kind of re-engage with them in a meaningful way that builds relationships. And so what Cradio's whole game plan is to do is to very simply ID these visitors, score them based on how they behave, so that we get some level of intent around their actions that we can then use to build an audience of these like-minded behavioral audiences. And then at the tail end of the day, we're trying to build you an audience that eliminates guesswork, and now you're focused only on an audience of these people who came to the site and then took the most kind of level of behavioral engagement. So you're not wasting time even with the people who may have been interested, but they're not ready. And so we want to figure out how to tell the difference between interested and ready, not interested, and interested and not ready.
So if I'm using Crateo and I want to know more about who's coming to my website, right? What, how do you report that back? How specific do you get when it comes to defining who that audience is?
So if you think about from the standpoint of the who, right? We think that there's a merger of who and what um, that creates what we call a digital footprint. So if Ken Umansky or Clay Sharman shows up on a website, it's not enough for us to be able to kind of segment the two of us in a demographic kind of profile because your buying patterns may be completely different than mine. Your interests in the services or the products that we're looking at may be different. So what we're really trying to do is go give you the demographics, absolutely, because it helps to know who we're talking to in order to frame the message. But we want to talk about, how many times did Ken visit? How recent were his visits? What pages was he seeming to be interested in? How long did he, kind of engage with that content? And then you pair that with the segments on the demographics, and you begin to get a very good picture of who Ken might be. And then, what we try to do is we look across and we find out just how many Kens are in this anonymous traffic for this month. because they're the ones we want to talk to. Whereas the Clay Sharman who came in, he kind of poked around, but it was short trips. He kind of jumped from page to page to page, and then he took off in under a minute. Well, they may want to find all of the Clay Sharmans in there and categorize me as less interested. And, now I'm going to be segmented in a different way. And so you get level of detail, but if you think about it, you get the demographics, an email for everybody, because that's our front door action. That's how we get back in touch with people. But if we can pull the demographics, you get that sort of robust image on the audience makeup. But the most important stuff is pairing what Google does well, which is telling you what kind of activity you're getting, but pair that to every individual who comes in with a score that allows you to then sort of rack and stack them.
So there's a lot of different criteria, engagement being part of it, frequency being part of it, and how they're grazing through the website
Right.
really helps to figure out who they are.
Yeah, and one of the things I think is kind of overlooked in the marketing space, and maybe it's because we didn't know before now, but it turns out that intent really fades quickly because there's so many options available to all of us thanks to the internet and e-com brands that if you don't understand recency as a kind of a guiding principle in understanding behavior, you may completely miss an accurate portrait, right? So your data may be great, but if it's already 3 weeks old, it may have aged out in terms of intent because the buyer may have already moved on and said, well, I've found something else and I kind of forgot about them. But if you had that recency understanding, you could reach back out, re-engage, and help them kind of come back in and rekindle that relationship before they move past you with an opportunity that's, built on something. So recency plays a major impact on intent. And I doubt everybody in the audience knows that, although once you hear it, it makes perfect sense.
So how does AI play into what you're doing?
So, from our perspective, the only thing that moves quick enough to identify and then pair the identity with behavior would be something like artificial intelligence that understands how to weight the variables that go into behavior. So, recency being a critical one, you have to have a mechanism that understands that just coming in 10 times over the period of a month is not nearly as important as understanding how those 10 times broke out over that month. Because 10 times on a Monday, the first day of the month, may signal, good intent if you'd have gotten to them sooner. But 10 times over the course of a month, where they came in 2 times the first week, 3 times the second week, 3 times the third week, and 2 times the last week, AI would be able to make a determination because of its kind of understanding of predictive capabilities and likely outcomes. It would say the second person has more interest than the first person, even though they came the exact number of times during the month. So a machine learning model that doesn't understand how to incorporate recency into it and consistency, which plays another role, um, you know, those things kind of fall short. And that's where modeling has, it started out with a very good intent, no pun intended there, but AI allows you to really target and understand what frequency, consistency, recency all play in. And then so we need a tool like AI to make those judgments in real time, basically.
Okay. So ad spend gets wasted all the time. God, we all know that, but it's often brushed off like a rounding error. What's the deeper impact when intent slips through the cracks? And what could businesses do differently than they're currently doing in the way they're spending money?
Yeah, so I think, in terms of wasted ad spend, first off, of course, it puts a larger target on your back in your upline when if there's a consistency over, man, we're just not seeming to get a bang for our buck. So I would look at it as beyond just the lost opportunity, you have this lost um, pipeline and lost movement through the funnel. So, you're losing out in a lot of different areas that go into what we consumers would like, a personal experience with these brands to be like. So understanding things like uh, getting back to me in a reasonable amount of time, but not sounding like we're always watching you, and ignoring, or at least better yet, avoiding that whole creepy factor that a lot of tools are guilty of, and that's the bottom line. So I think what it boils down to is every brand should be thinking about the data that comes into their website as first party data that they should own. I mean, their goal should be to not just find out that their SEO efforts are working. You want to own as much of that data as possible to really dig in and understand how could I be improving results? How could I be reducing ad spend? And so you have to stop looking at things the way it's always been, which is this is the way we've always done it. 2% conversion, 2% this, 2%, the 2% rule. But if you simply flip that formula around, it means that we're building a success model on a 2% and we're accepting the 98% failure or lack of understanding in this thing. It's a giant gaping hole. And so I think really just understanding there's value in all of your efforts. There's value in all of the data that comes in because even the stuff that we say is discardable in terms of intent allows us to recognize in the future that discardable audience and never report on them to begin with. And so, you begin to exclude them right away as a feature of understanding. So I would say that, really digging in and with a goal to understand the who, because presumably all of these brands have the same goal. I want to build a relationship with these people who are coming to my site. I want them to trust so we can build loyalty and then, customer lifetime value. And that's the whole goal.
Absolutely. So you talk a lot about dark data. I've seen you talk about that on your website. Those silent clicks, those visitors we never identify, can you walk us through how Cradio turns that into gold? What's the engine really under the hood?
Yeah, sure. So, at the end of the day, volume drives a lot of our understanding. So, it may not tell us enough just to look at Ken and Clay in terms of who we are as clicks and signals. But when Cradio comes, kind of establishes itself on a brand site and goes to work, the whole goal is let's identify. Actually, I'm going to flip it because I like this notion of dark data, which we do talk about. Cradio is essentially a giant spotlight, right? And so you've got this huge void of anonymity.
Mhm.
Um, but you've also got this brand owned property that their whole goal is not just to drive people to us, but to understand who they are and be able to communicate with them. So, you know,
Mhm.
we're kind of a powerful spotlight that looks to identify a big swath of that traffic that comes through and then pair everybody with a kind of a scorecard of their interactions for each time they come in. And so, as we engage more and re-engage and we understand what campaigns or channels are working, we update that model. And so we're now creating a kind of, a broader spotlight on audiences. And then as we test one audience against a new channel or campaign in some sort of re-engagement effort, our models are able to then learn from that and then again apply that filter going forward. So the dark, starts to kind of spread wide or shrink a little bit. We're just kind of brightening up the entire environment of anonymity. And I think it's important to note that, the people who go to a site and intentionally and specifically don't want to be targeted for any kind of marketing efforts for whatever reason, if they opt out, we don't track them. So we're not going after anybody who has said, don't send me any marketing stuff. So we don't intrude on that front.
Yeah, that was going to be a question, but thanks for answering it.
Sorry.
Uh, the marketing world's obsessed with scale, impressions, and reach, but Cradio feels like it's built on a different, belief system, relevance. Why is that your North Star?
So great question. Relevance is tied directly to behavior, and we can predict behavior based on relevance in terms of action. you can't understand relevance against the demographic profile. So what would normally have been kind of an accepted practice would be lookalike audiences, where you have large segments of people who looked like other audience segments, and then they used extrapolation as a tool for interpreting potential predictors. But what we found was behavior through action is not only a more sound way to get achievable forecasted predictions, it's the only way to look forward, right? It's almost like what you hear on the stock portfolio companies when they say past performance, isn't an indicator. But
Yeah,
in our case, it absolutely is because behavior always is an indicator. And very few people change their behavior over time, even if they change, by aging out of a demographic or moving. So you can change demographic information, but behavior is pretty static. We're all sort of who we are, no matter what.
that's so true. We're running out of time, but let me ask you one final question. If you had to sum up Cradio's core business value in one word, what would it be?
Momentum. Uh, I would pick momentum, because what we're trying to do is shorten that path from signal to action. And so that's at the end of the day, taking action is how you're going to drive trust, build relationships, and ultimately, kind of provide business value in this AI-driven era.
Hmm.
Speed matters is what it boils down to.
Well, Clay, that really was a master class in what you're doing. Thanks for showing us what's really possible when data meets intent and when AI is used not to guess at audiences, but to understand who they are. Um, what you've built at Krateo.ai proves that the future of marketing isn't louder, it's smarter, and it's personalized and more human. Thank you for your time and for your insight.
Thanks so much, Ken. It was great to be here.
Just like Crateo AI helps brands find clarity in the digital chaos, Performix is helping businesses reimagine how they work with custom AI agents designed to simplify operations and uncover hidden opportunities, and help use data to make smarter and faster decisions. That means making intelligent tech not just accessible, but actionable across sales, manufacturing, marketing, customer experience, and beyond. Curious what an AI agent can do for your business? Visit performixbiz.com and then explore. Um, Thank you for tuning in today to Technology Today. And until next time, stay smart, stay curious, and keep innovating.